Yes, important to make sure that this is recorded. As a note for anybody who is observing this meeting, either live or via WebEx, this is a meeting of the Climate Justice Working Group. This is not a public hearing or forum. We will not be taking any testimony or questions from the public during this meeting. If you are attending, we ask that you remain respectful and refrain from raising your hands or attempting to draw attention to yourself or interjecting in any point during the meeting. For folks here in the Climate Justice Working Group, meeting rooms, generally we'd like them to be muted when you're not talking, just to reduce noise. To speak, please raise your hand, state your name for recording purposes, and remote participants, try to be on video if you can per open meetings law. Obviously, for anyone who is virtual and can't be on camera, let me know, and then that's fine. So we're going to move along to our agenda, and I'm going to pass it to Oliver.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second of 4 Climate Justice Working Group meetings to be held in 2025. My name is Oliver Riley, and I'm a climate policy analyst I'm the climate policy and facilitation section lead in the Office of Environmental Justice. I'm going to be taking over for Alana as the facilitator of these meetings. Alana will continue to serve as chair of the board and a voting member, and I will be serving in a facilitatory role for these meetings and activities of the Climate Justice Working Group in general. Before we get into the business of the day, it's my pleasure to introduce, I hope she's on, Commissioner Amanda Lefton to the Climate Justice Working Group. Commissioner Lefton was confirmed by the New York State Senate in May of this year and comes to the agency after serving as the director of the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management with the Biden administration. Commissioner Lefton is joining us today to discuss her vision for the DEC and her commitment to environmental justice. Due to time constraints, the Climate Justice Working Group members are invited to send any questions they have for the commissioner to me, and we will provide responses directly following the meeting. Let's see, Commissioner Lefton.
I am here, Oliver, if you're looking for me.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to speak here today. It's really an honor to be with all of you, and I want to commend the Climate Justice Working Group for the critically important work that you do. And as commissioner of this incredible agency, which it's an honor to assume this role, I want you to know that DEC and Governor Hochul remain committed to climate justice and environmental justice, and importantly, the work of the Climate Justice Working Group. Your role, including identifying disadvantaged communities, is incredibly important and really is setting the standard for this type of work across the country. And with the retreat of the federal government from environmental justice and from climate change, science, all of the things that we fought so hard for, this work is more critical than ever. And we're dealing with the impacts and effects of climate change every single day, and we're currently navigating uncharted waters when it comes to the shameful deregulation and abandonment of vulnerable communities from the federal government. The Trump administration is doing everything in their power to roll back our progress and erode environmental safeguards. In fact, we have a president who embarrassingly took a global stage last week and claimed that climate change was the biggest con of our time, but we know better. As our own federal government is moving our country backwards, erasing decades of progress on clean air and ignoring science, threatening public health of millions of New Yorkers and putting us at risk, we in New York are going to stand up. We are ever hopeful, and we have a true champion in Governor Hochul. And because of your work, New York State is better able to prioritize disadvantaged communities through investments like our transformational $4.2 billion Clean Air, Clean Water, and Green Jobs Environmental Bond Act, through the record high Environmental Protection Fund at $425 million, which importantly funds our environmental justice grant program, as well as many other critical programs for the state's environment, and through a record $6 billion invested in clean water infrastructure since 2017. Here at DEC, we're restoring habitats, bolstering resilience by bringing back nature to communities, and encouraging economic development, reducing pollution, revitalizing neighborhoods, and enhancing recreational opportunities for all New Yorkers. Environmental justice is about ensuring that one group of people doesn't bear a disproportionate share of the negative environmental consequences from pollution or policies. And we know that for far too long, that has happened in the state and across the country. Environmental justice is about fairness. It's about meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income. And it's about helping marginalized communities with greater exposure to environmental hazards and pollution. In New York, we're continuing our commitment to investing in environmental justice communities and ensuring that our actions are not adding to the already disproportionate burdens vulnerable communities are subject to on a daily basis. And we're going to lead by example. In fact, I'm really excited that DEC continues to really lead by example. And an example of that is actually last week, we finalized and posted Commissioner Policy 79. And what Commissioner policies are is essentially our policies for our own operations. And we finalized our policy, which will require DEC to both establish and maintain an inventory of DEC facilities in disadvantaged communities for the purposes of prioritizing those facilities for energy and environmentally efficient upgrades, as well as ensuring that any new facilities will avoid the negative impacts to disadvantaged communities. So critically, DEC is a regulator where we really seek to minimize impacts to disadvantaged communities and ensure that we are righting those historic wrongs of environmental pollution. We're going to walk the walk to ensure that we also are thinking about our own operational impact on disadvantaged communities across the state and ensure that we are prioritizing investments that minimize those. With Governor Hochul's leadership, DEC is also continuing our commitment to the next generation of environmental leaders by equipping our youth with the tools they need to join the growing green jobs sector. We talk a lot about the economic opportunity and the job opportunities that a green energy economy will bring to New Yorkers. But really critically at DEC, we want to make sure that disadvantaged communities in particular have availability of the skills that are needed to participate. So we announced a $4 million grant program to help youth in environmental justice areas and DACs develop skills training and job placement in various green industries across the state through the Environmental Justice Green Jobs for Youth grants, which we are really excited to reinvigorate last week through a new grant opportunity. And of course, I know you're all familiar with DEC's landmark community air monitoring initiative. And later today, you're going to hear more about the Extreme Heat Action Plan and DEC's Urban Heat Island Mapping Project. There's so much DEC is doing, and the team is hard at work at building upon the progress already made to advance a vision for our agency. And part of our vision and really is based around 4 key elements. One is restoring trust in government. Really critically, as we see the federal government attacking federal workers and really degrading our trust in government, we know that we need to do better and do more to restore that trust in government. And that includes improving customer service, modernizing our agency, and advancing safety for the public and for our team members. 2, we want to advance sustainable development by proactively steering development to reduce impacts to disadvantaged communities, wildlife, and our critical natural resources. 3 is bolstering and creating more resilient communities and ecosystems by addressing climate impacts and leveraging nature and nature-based solutions to reduce risks to people, the environment, and infrastructure from climate change. And finally, and importantly, fighting back against federal rollback to safeguard New York State's clean air and clean water from attacks on environmental policies, programs, and investments. As we move forward with this vision for the agency, I ask for the continued partnership of the Climate Justice Working Group as we work to implement our shared goals. Governor Hochul and I know how lucky DEC is to have a robust coalition to help us, to challenge us, to make sure that we continue to move forward and fight for the environment and community advocates just like you and many across the country who are willing to speak truth to power and help us fight for what is right and just. Together, we can safeguard our air, our lands, and water, protect our environment, and improve the lives of all New Yorkers. And we do that by improving our stormwater infrastructure, bolstering resiliency, including in communities most affected by extreme heat conditions exacerbated by the urban heat island effect. We do that by ensuring green spaces are protected for future generations and increasing access to the outdoors for historically marginalized communities. We do that by redeveloping former industrial sites and putting them back into productive use and holding polluters accountable. We do that by considering the extent of our actions on communities today and in the decades that will follow. And as Governor Hochul has stated, and I've echoed, we will vigorously defend our constitutional authority to build on our progress. We are fortunate to have leaders like the governor and all of you, leaders who are committed to ensuring children, families, and all residents have access to clean air and clean water. I believe this work must be done with a lens of addressing the disproportionate burdens of pollution and climate change in disadvantaged communities, and with inclusivity, as we proudly ensure that our lands and our natural resources are for everyone. New York is focused on increasing affordability, boosting economic development, and those can be done while still maintaining environmental protections. We've learned this time and time again in the state. It's not one or the other. We know that we can build housing, repurpose brownfields and Superfund sites for beneficial uses, and encourage business to develop. I believe that we can bolster and create more resilient communities and ecosystems by addressing climate change and its impacts, leveraging natural and nature-based solutions to reduce risks to people, the environment, and infrastructure, while we also see new economic opportunities and growth, and especially for those living in environmental justice communities. Now is time to push forward, not retreat on environmental action. And I'm confident that through the collaboration and partnership that we have, we will advance the governor's climate agenda and achieve solutions that will benefit all New Yorkers. I really look forward to working with you to deliver transformational results for New York. Thank you so much. And I'll turn it back over to Oliver. And I will just sort of offer and say that, of course, we're here today at a formal meeting, but to the extent it's valuable, I would love to really sit down with members of the Climate Justice Working Group as time permits moving forward and just continue to deepen and build on our partnership. So I very much look forward to that. And please know my door is always open. Back to you, Oliver.
Thank you, Commissioner Lefton. Next slide, please. So at this time, I'm going to take roll call for members of the working group. Please acknowledge your presence when I call your name. Sonal Jessel.
Present.
Thank you. Eric Walker.
I think we're
Here.
still.
Thank you.
Let's see.
Arif Ullah.
Present.
Thank you. Abigail McHugh Griffa. Are we missing Abby?
Oh, she's there. She's in Avon.
Okay, I guess we're having some audio issues with the Avon office. We'll loop back. Amber Johnson.
Here.
Amy Klein.
Here.
Thank you. Julie Suarez.
Present.
Thank you. Alana Kettle-Tucky.
Here.
Thank you. Neil.
I'm here.
Hi. Elizabeth Firth.
Present.
Hello. Hello. And I believe Jill Henk is expected to be absent. Were we able to figure out audio with Abigail?
Abby, we can't hear you. We unmute her. We can unmute her, I believe.
We can see her there, but okay.
Abby, can you? I think I just unmuted you.
Can you hear me?
Can hear you now.
Okay. Good to see you all. I'm here.
You too.
Great, thank you. And now I'm going to pass things back to Alana for the approval of the minutes.
Great. Thanks, Oliver. So we definitely have established that we have quorum. There are 7 or more Climate Justice Working Group members in physically accessible locations. So we can now vote on our minutes from our February meeting. We did not take minutes at our June meeting because we had a presentation. So the minutes from February are currently on the Climate Justice Working Group website at climate.ny.gov as draft. Once we approve the minutes, they will no longer be draft. The minutes were sent along to working group members to add any issues or make any amendments. Now that we have established that we have quorum, are there any questions, corrections, or concerns with the minutes before we move forward with a vote?
Yeah, my title changed. So it's Elizabeth Firth. I'm a project coordinator. I'm not a fellow anymore.
Well, congratulations. We're very happy to hear that. We will make
It
sure
was a
that
little
that is.
delayed, but yeah, that's.
We'll make sure to make that adjustment in the minutes.
And then just it sounds like I wouldn't be able to vote, and then I did vote, and I don't know if this should be an amendment or not, but that like I was able to get permission to vote. Do other folks remember that? And the minutes sort of sound like I just voted at a certain point.
Okay,
Some recollection of that,
yeah,
Yeah.
we'll make that correction in the minutes before they are, and then we'll amend them and then put them back up on the website.
Wonderful, thank you.
Okay, if everyone could please signal their approval or of the minutes by raising their hand. Oh, yeah, wait, I'm here too, sorry. I forget about myself.
I'm seeing
Are you counting?
some hands.
There's 6 of us here.
I see.
Amber has hers up. Sonal is yes. Eric is yes.
Where's yes?
Yep. New York City, you guys have your hands up. I can't see.
Sorry, what was the question?
Oh, approval of the minutes, just kind of signal.
Oh, yes, we approve with the amendments, yes.
Yes, with amendments. So we see that we have at least 7 approvals. So the minutes will be approved and will be amended and then re-upped on the climate.ny.gov website for folks to review.
Great.
Fantastic. All right, with that, I'll pass it back to all of you.
Yeah, so it is our pleasure to introduce Dr. Leo Bockinger from DEC's Office of Climate Change. He's going to be providing us with an update to the Extreme Heat Action Plan and an overview of the work that's been done on the Urban Heat Island Mapping Project. Leo, please take it away whenever you're ready.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, Oliver. Good afternoon. Thank you so much to the Climate Justice Working Group members for having us today and allowing us to give you an update on the Urban Heat Island Mapping Project. Looking forward to a conversation today. I have with me also Dr. Theodore Tedentrenny from SUNY ESF, who's the principal investigator for this project. I'll invite him to introduce himself as we get into the demonstration of the tool and the update of the project. I want to at the top also thank Joanna Ostrud, the project co-manager for this project for OCC, as well as David Tree as the other project partner in addition to SUNY ESF. But we'll get into all of those exciting things as this update progresses. Next slide, please. For this meeting, I have 2 things with me that I'm providing an update for. The one is a brief update and a recap of the Extreme Heat Action Plan, the New York State Extreme Heat Action Plan. Some of the members, or probably most, if not all members, are familiar, but I do want to take some minutes or just brief minutes to recap where the plan stands, how that is progressing, and put that Urban Heat Island Mapping Project also in the context of that plan, but then principally focus on an update on the Urban Heat Island Mapping Project and especially a demonstration of a preliminary Urban Heat Island maps and the online tool to explore those preliminary maps. I'll also give a brief forward-looking a preview on the next steps in that project and what to expect as this project continues in the next year. Next slide, please. So very briefly on the Extreme Heat Action Plan. This is a New York State plan that NYSERDA and DEC developed together with what's called the Extreme Heat Action Plan Work Group, pursuant to a 2022 State of the State address by Governor Hochul, which directed DC and NYSERDA to develop an extreme heat action plan to address the current and future impacts of extreme heat on disadvantaged communities and other vulnerable populations, areas of recreation, areas of employment and recreational zones in particular. The heat plan was developed, next slide please, in partnership with over 20 state agencies. in this working group to develop the plan. You see them listed here, and you see also in bold those agencies that are leading on actions in the extreme heat action plan. What that means, I'll explain in a second. Next slide, please. The extreme heat action plan itself is one of, for the lack of a better word, two pillars of extreme heat action in New York State. There are more, but I think there's two overarching umbrellas that really help coordinate the state's response and efforts to proactively adapt to extreme heat. The one is the Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan's heat annex. This is a hazard-specific annex to the Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan. Next slide, please. So this is a hazard-specific annex to the Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan. What the CEMP or Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan does is detail how existing resources, capacities, assets get mobilized in response to acute events. The annex does this specifically for extreme heat. This work is led by DHIS, the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, which is the state's emergency coordinator who coordinates all the agencies. And so they are a key partner in this work, also in the Extreme Heat Action Plan. And this really, the heat annex was released in June 2023, is annually updated, and is really the one aspect of how do we mobilize existing resources. Next slide, please. The second pillar, as I mentioned, is the Extreme Heat Action Plan. This was released in June 2024 and developed in this partnership across agencies, and looks towards adaptation and resilience, building adaptation and resilience to current and future impacts of extreme heat. It's more about mobilizing, about creating synergies, developing new resources, clarifying the capabilities for adapt to future impacts, and expand the capacity of the state and local partners to address extreme heat. Next slide, please. The Extreme Heat Action Plan is really focused on what state agencies are intending to do to address extreme heat. It comprises 49 actions. Those 49 actions are organized in 4 tracks. And for each of those actions, the plan specifies lead and supporting agencies that collaborate on advancing those actions. It articulates goals, 2-year and 5-year goals that agencies seek to pursue in implementing those actions. So it is really an action-oriented plan for what state agencies are going to do to build adaptive capacity, support local communities in adapting. Those 4 tracks are shown here. There's some areas of focus within those 4 tracks, but they really build the spectrum of how extreme heat action happens. The first is really about building planning, local adaptation capacity, and supporting implementation. Includes things like developing better tools for planning, supporting local planning processes, things like that. The second track is on preparedness and communication about extreme heat, long-term community preparedness, but also protecting workers' health and safety. The third track focuses on the built environment. This includes infrastructure, and this includes also certain congregate institutional settings, educational settings for which the plan formulates actions to protect those populations as well. And the fourth track is to mobilize and mainstream ecosystem-based, nature-based solutions across all those tracks to really unlock also the co-benefits to addressing extreme heat with other impacts and unlocking ecosystem services more broadly. So that is the Extreme Heat Action Plan. Next slide, please. After its release, agencies went immediately to work in implementing the plan. Last June, we released the first annual readiness update, which detailed significant progress in implementing the plan in alignment or along the line, in line with the goals and the actions set forth in the plan. The first 2 pages give a high-level summary of the readiness update, as well as an overview of key resources and tools available to support local action. And then it goes into detail on what kind of activities happened over the first year of implementation. You can access that and other resources that we showed today on ny.gov/extremeheat. So that's on.ny.gov/extremeheat. You see the link here on the slides too. This leads to the plan, to other resources, and the tool that we are presenting today. Next slide, please. All right. So this was the Extreme Heat Action Plan. One of the actions in the plan is the Urban Heat Island Mapping Project. It's in this first track of building capacity to plan and to support strategic adaptation to extreme heat. Next slide, please. The project is also pursuant to legislation directing DEC to study urban heat island effects and specifically to identify areas of concentrations of high heat, including in urban disadvantaged communities. We had an extensive, really deep dive into the methodology at a previous Climate Justice Working Group meeting that was recorded also with Professor Entreni, who's here on the call today. So I won't go into quite as much detail. I think we spent 30 minutes presenting the methodology in consultation with the Climate Justice Working Group. Today we give you an update on the first project outcomes and give you a line of sight on what comes next. A key goal of this project is to develop, next slide please, maps identifying those concentrations of extreme heat. To do that consistently and in support of all communities, we are developing statewide extreme heat exposure maps on the 30 meter by 30 meter resolution. We'll dive a little bit into what these look like, but they are focused on displaying heat index and wet bulb globe temperature on the 30 meter by 30 meter resolution, both for historic data and in future iterations, also including considerations of climate change and some modeling of land use change to anticipate not only where current concentrations are, but also where there might be future risk for urban heat islands. This is the part one of this project to develop those maps. In addition, we also develop in partnership with SUNY ESF online toolkits to explore those maps, to access this data, but also to support simulations of how interventions in the urban space and the built environment affect extreme heat, to help communities understand and explore, one, which streetscapes are particularly exposed, but then also what kind of solutions might really help address these exposures and address the urban heat island effect, for example, by installing green infrastructure. Next slide, please. Here is a timeline of this project, including where we are today, which is Q2, June 2025. We started in Q2 of 2024, convened with the project team, developed the preliminary hottest hour maps, which I'll explain, and Ted Entreni, Professor Entreni, will explain in more detail in a minute what that means. These were released in draft form earlier this year, and we showcased those today. Subsequently, over the next year, we will develop a static website with final maps in early 2026. And subsequently a toolkit in a first iteration and experimental toolkit for exploring those data in greater detail as described, including exploring those solutions before we then have a final toolkit. This beta version of the toolkit will be released as an experimental version, similar to the preliminary hottest hour maps now, meaning that they're not final data initially, but that we welcome users as they use those maps and explore the online informational tool to send us feedback to make sure that users can give us insight in potential improvements before we have final tools also. Next slide, please. A quick word before we jump into the tool and how we got to where we are today in terms of additional input. Initially, DEC issued a request for information to identify the best approach for developing those maps and tools in winter 2022 and early 2023. Based on this information request, DEC developed the approach and consulted the Climate Justice Working Group on the methodology, and then entered into a memorandum of understanding with SUNY ESF to undertake this work. Since then, we've developed this preliminary urban heat island maps that we showcase today and the preliminary online tool in consultation with advisory panels, practitioner advisory panels. Some of the organizations on the Climate Justice Working Group have representatives on those panels, as well as a state staff to ensure that those tools are really focused on meeting user needs and that those tools receive the uptake and utility they are intended to. And in June, we released those preliminary maps that we today can come here to update you on and demonstrate to you. With that, I will, next slide, please. I already talked about that. We are now jumping in a demonstration. One more slide. So this is the maps, next slide, the preliminary maps and this first part of the deliverables. The other two that I mentioned earlier, the toolkits and simulation, will give a brief review at the end, but I'll steal now the screen share and jump into the tool. And as I do so, I would like to invite Professor Andreni to introduce himself and then talk briefly about how we, what those maps are and how we got here. Professor Andreni?
Thank you, Leo. I too am having a little bit of audio visual, so I have to try to look into your screen. So Leo is pulling up the website that we have created in collaboration with our partners at DavyTree. I'm at the State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry, and of course with the DEC Office of Climate. And we have an about screen that will go through the material that we did present at an earlier meeting. And this will continue to be updated as we provide new product. And Leo, I don't know if you're doing a real-time view of this website right now. So if you would like, you can just continue to move about. You're in the about now, but move to the home or to any other screen and I can continue to explain it, or I can elaborate on any one page, but I don't want to go on for too long on any one without your encouragement.
Absolutely. Maybe we start, and thanks so much for introducing yourself and joining us today. Maybe we can start with a brief overview using the About page to explain what those maps actually are in terms of the information they convey, and then I can showcase the website itself and walk through the website and the ways that data can be explored.
Okay. Well, let me provide for the overview our guiding mission, which is to use our natural resources, including those within our urban and non-urban areas, to provide ecosystem services such as clean and cool air and water to improve human health and biodiversity. And so with that as our goal, our mission, even, we then set about creating tools that allow communities to engage with their natural resources and to view the ecosystem services. And one way that we use these maps that are shown here in that upper panel is as an inventory of our existing natural resources, which include our tree cover and other land cover types, including water. The tool that we develop processes this information using a set of equations that are based in physics and biology to look at how the water and energy cycles are coupled, and that when we can, through trees, provide an evaporative flux, and that's a lot of words, but essentially means a tree is photosynthesizing and creating its own food as a primary producer. It takes water from the soil and it releases it through its leaves as a vapor. And this process cools the air. And then, as we know, the shade of that tree also cools the area. And so this is one illustration of how that model works, and that's what's being explained in this page. The maps that we're creating at this point are focusing on the intensity of the heat that different communities are experiencing. And the phrase that we use for that intensity is called hottest hour. The model works at an hourly time step at this point, and that's the typical time step in which weather data are presented. And for those that have opened a weather app, you typically see that they give you an update in temperature by hour. And we went through the past 10 years approximately across New York State and looked at what were the hottest hours at weather stations. And then our model was able to map how that heat was experienced within the city and countrysides. the hottest hour can be described in different ways. One common way is just air temperature. Another common way is called heat index. And yet another is called wet bulb globe temperature. Each of those are really important for understanding the extremity of the heat. The air temperature is simply how hot it is, and that the way we feel that heat is also dependent on the humidity, and that's what the heat index conveys. And then the wet bulb globe temperature is getting at how the sunlight and the wind, along with the humidity and the air temperature, affect our experience. And I apologize, Leo, that I'm a little out of sync. I have to look away from the camera in order to see the bigger monitor that you're scrolling through. So you can prompt me again. Leo and I are friends, so I won't take any offense of him rushing me along or asking me to elaborate.
No problem at all. I think this is really helpful, and we can dive into details of the question in questions. I think maybe as a last aspect, if you could very briefly talk about the key drivers of the models that help us project out those 30-meter resolution hottest hour maps.
Okay, so here I want to ask the audience to envision their own experience with extreme heat, and perhaps the drivers will make sense as I go through them. So if anyone in the audience has experienced a very hot, unpleasant, we call extreme heat moment, if you can reflect on where you were, and I can go then maybe help us explain some of what was happening. Typically, if you are outdoors, and so the experience is you're not in a car or a building, but outdoors, the hot experience is often associated with being in a parking lot or some kind of equivalent surface, which is extensively impervious, is the word we use, or sealed. And the counter example of that, maybe some of the coolest moments you've had or that can be experienced, would be within a forest. And so these are two levers that we look at when we think about how land cover can help us change our energy and water cycle and deliver that cooling ecosystem service, the green cooling services. The other components that we can look at include, as Leo has this map shown of New York State and those little tabs up above, elevation. So as you move up or down, you typically will experience a different temperature. Air will cool at higher elevations, and I can love to have you in my meteorology class where I talk about why, but essentially the density of air is lower, and so the air particles expand, they do work, and they cool. So we're looking at the effect of elevation, and of course, as you go lower, air will warm. And then the percent evergreen is going to let you know, even during leaf off season, whether or not your tree has leaves. So we live in a beautiful part of the world where we have the seasonality of our leaves losing their photosynthetic green, becoming these beautiful reds and oranges and yellows, then eventually falling off the tree. But there are other trees that you may know have a permanent needle or are evergreen. And so we represent that as well. And then we care about this next tab, Leo, the TCOIC is shorthand for tree cover over impervious cover. And many of you might have experienced this, where the tree canopy, where all the leaves are on the limbs, can extend out over a sidewalk or a parking lot. And that will also then change the way that the energy and water are partitioned and our experience of temperature. And then the last two tabs are, we need to follow when the leaf is on the tree, meaning it has moved from being a bud, which is a little element that doesn't have any leaf exposed. The bud will open, the leaf will grow. We'll have an entire season of this, and then the leaf will senescence and will fall off, what I was just describing earlier. And those are dates that we have throughout New York State. Thank you, Leo, for allowing me to explain that those are the inputs to the model.
Thank you so much. And so I will briefly show what this generates, and then we can dive into questions for Professor Trenny first on technical aspects and have more discussion subsequently. So based on those model elements, we generated this preliminary data tool. This only represents the hottest hour modeled using those drivers of the model that that Professor Antrani just described to model out the hottest hour between 2010 and 2019. So this only talks about the intensity on a 30 meter by 30 meter resolution. This also means that, for example, a extreme heat value in the western part of the state might be from a that's depicted here may be from a different date than one, say, in the lower Hudson Valley or in the Adirondacks, because maybe that hottest hour occurred on a different time span within those 10 years. What is important here is that these maps display a measure of intensity based on those factors described here, and using weather station data to display the intensity, the past occurrence of heat intensity. In future iterations and in the next parts of this project, we will also look at duration and frequency, for the lack of a better word, with hourly runs, and we can discuss this as needed in the question area. Here we can have a first measure in these preliminary maps on the intensity. So you have this first page here on the home page that just gives you a map of the state. You can zoom in and out. It gives you outlines of the disadvantaged communities. It gives you the state outline and the different county borders, but you also can explore this data, and it gives you a heat index and air temperature. Both are available here. It might take a second to load in. You also have all this data as GIS data for download, and the static maps, meaning JPEGs, photographs, static downloads of the whole maps. But you can also really dive into this data geographically. One way to do that is in urban areas. This is the metropolitan statistical areas for those of you who like census tract data. To explore this data deeper, I'm jumping into the capital region just because that's where I'm physically located, and and so you see here this data. Here you get also urban heat island effect data, which is comparing any pixel, any of the 30 meter by 30 meter pixels, with the heaviest forested pixel in the area, to give you a sense of what we would expect it to be versus what the temperature here is based on those drivers of the model. Say like there is a concentration of impervious surface that traps heat. So this the modeled exposure temperature here is higher than in a fully forested pixel in this parcel. And so you end up with these maps of 30 meter by 30 meter resolution that display the hottest hour in terms of air temperature. Again, like my computer might not have the air temperature readily loaded in. Here we go, the heat index, and then this comparative value of the urban heat island effect. And you have this again as a download as GIS data, as geospatial data, as well as static maps. You can also explore them down here as raster maps, the 30 meter by 30 meter resolution maps, as well as in the census block groups to have a coarser information, but also get a bit more of the data. You can also get that by clicking here, gives you the values, the mean high temperature, the mean heat index as modeled for this location. And it again has the disadvantaged community outlines as block groups. The block groups, my goodness, I'm clicking too fast for the application. So the cyan colored components are disadvantaged community block groups. Finally, one last, you also can explore this via the counties, and then within the counties areas of the state, click on the counties to get countywide data. And finally, what I want to emphasize is that this color gradient does not necessarily convey heat per se. Just because there are cooler colors doesn't mean that temperatures are safe in these areas. Rather, this is to one, accommodate color blindness and like make it easier for people with color blindness to read those maps, but also because there's such a high concentration, like higher range of temperatures in New York City, where these colors here will appear cooler in the current setup of the maps. They are not scaling geographically, but over the state currently. I will stop here and pause for questions before then talking about next steps as a wrap up, especially for Professor Entreni. Yeah, so I'll stop here. Also in case you want to see anything on those maps. And Oliver, I can't quite see if someone has questions. Otherwise, I can finish the presentation 2 more minutes and then yeah, go
Question
ahead.
here in Albany. Thank you.
Okay, go for it.
Julie Spires, Cornell Cals, and I was really curious. Somehow it had completely escaped me that we did an extreme heat plan. So I really appreciate your presentation on that. I just want to point out that from an agricultural perspective, super important to be thinking about extreme heat impacts on food. So I noticed Ag and Markets was a part of that. I'm really happy. I'm going to go back and dig into it. When I look at just this past season, we had extended wet springs followed by extended, we're in a drought now and yields are down, and that will have an impact on our state and our food security, and including our disadvantaged and our non-disadvantaged communities. So that was my comment. Then really fascinated by the urban heat index maps. And I think if I caught this right, you said that the data ended, or you were looking at data from 2019, which makes sense, aggregated data sets. I know these things take a while before you can kind of update them in tools. But as a next step to this project, are you also looking at, okay, you've identified the urban heat indexes, and not just in New York City, but throughout the state. I know we've been focusing on several different interventions from urban forestry grant programs. We've been doing a lot of work with community gardeners in the city. Is the intention to think about, okay, let's take this tool and push it further and see what interventions we're implementing in our disadvantaged communities that are showing positive change towards impacting this. And I'm not sure if you can do that from the 2019 data, but I was just curious because I could see a lot of really fun policy-focused research opportunities from this data set.
I almost started answering without unmuting myself. So we won't be able to look at existing concrete projects and what their impact was just in terms of data, but we are looking towards being able to simulate certain kinds of solutions and what their in order of magnitude potential for addressing urban heat islands may be. And Professor Entreni, would you be able to dive a little, give a very high level overview of what that will look like as we are starting to explore that aspect of the project currently?
Certainly. Thank you for the question. It's exciting that you mentioned the utility of this for something like an agricultural production. And that would come back to what Leo was describing when he said, not only are we showing the intensity of the heat, but the duration and its frequency. So these would be metrics that might assist in the work with agricultural production. And then in terms of what is the effect of any prior intervention on those elements of extreme heat, the potential to see that would be something that we could discuss offline. But right now, it would be difficult for you to, I'd say, query around that time step, because the current draft map is only a one point in time. Once we complete the project, we will be able to show extreme heat for different points in time. And then you would be able to toggle between those two maps using any of the tools that Leo was showing you. You could download them in different raster formats and look at whether or not any one of the pixels or polygon areas had a different response before versus after that intervention. In addition, I'll just let you know that we are also going to be simulating future climate. And that's one of the reasons we chose 2010 through 2019. We're working with a proven federal climate database. And in order to look at the change in frequency, intensity, and duration of extreme heat, we need to align with dates that they have. And so they have this 2010 through 2019 as a historical period, and they have a 2050-59 as a future period, if I remember correctly.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's exciting.
Thank you.
I have a question, unless there's someone ahead of me. No. Okay. Arif Ullah, New York City. First of all, thank you for this presentation. And at a time when data is being disappeared and science is under assault, I think this work is even more important. A couple of things. One, I'm wondering if this data will ever be layered with air pollution data, because we know that extreme heat combined with air pollution can lead to and does cause a number of sort of health complications. So, asthma exacerbated, for example, when there is extreme heat. So that's one thing. And the other is, I wonder what kind of, this is a toolkit. Presumably it is available for community members, groups to use. I wonder what kind of outreach will be done, and also whether there are any trainings that will be provided on how to use this toolkit. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for those questions. Maybe the very first, and there was not directly a question, but in terms of the availability currently, if you go to that on.ny.gov extreme heat page that I mentioned earlier as a resource, you find a brief explainer of the heat plan, and then the resources around the extreme heat action plan, the readiness update that I mentioned, and then here the online map viewer. So that's the easiest way to get to what I'm demonstrating here. That's live now as this preliminary informational tool as we develop the full tool. For your first question about layering air pollution data in, we are exploring and still developing the final toolkit and its features. We have the two advisory panels I mentioned of state staff, of practitioners that we are querying, asking for their expertise for in understanding better what would be particularly valuable data to include here. In addition, however, because we think that people will have really exciting other ways that they might want to explore this data, we again provide all this data also for download, so people can create and combine additional data. So I don't have a specific answer yet on if we will include air pollution data. I will bring this with me, certainly. There's also other data that we're exploring, like the Department of Health Heat Vulnerability Index and other information, and what makes sense to keep that tool agile while responding to things, and then allowing for the ability for others to use it too. We don't have specific training plans right now. We will be, once the final tools are out, bring them to different convenings as we do with many tools. I'm talking about this tool as much as I can, including through you. So I really appreciate the opportunity. In terms of hearing from others on input, like I mentioned, the submit feedback here. We have this on each page of this preliminary tool, and this is really open-ended in terms of how is this tool working, what would be useful in expanding it. And so this is another way that anybody really is encouraged and to come and share insights as they use the tool in real action right now. And I missed pointing that out. I usually always do, so I appreciate you bringing this question up. I hope this responds to your question.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's just such a valuable tool. And if there can be sort of more proactive outreach to, a range of groups from academic institutions to communities, I think that it could really strengthen the work that people are doing, including advocacy campaigns that community groups are advancing.
Absolutely. And I think you mentioned one important point here, and that is, this is a model, right? It will have always imperfections. And so one thing that's important to note is that this data should, and we encourage this, including on the website, to use this data in conjunction with local data and local experiences. There's different mapping efforts in communities. There's communities that have different experiences. And so we hope that this tool can help bring one resource to communities that don't have the capacities for mapping and to get this data, but then also to help deepen their understanding of extreme heat in conjunction with this local data.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm looking at the time, and I know Professor Indrani, Ted has to jump in 5 to 10 minutes for another class. Well, a class and the teaching obligations. I really appreciate Dr. Andreni's time to join us here. If there's other questions, we can also send them and follow them up if I can't answer them. But with that, I'll also stop sharing the screen. We kind of went through the remainder of my presentation, but would you mind bringing back up the slides, and I'll give a brief outlook on what's next.
Hey, Leo, before we jump,
Get back up real quick.
ahead, sorry, this is Eric here in Buffalo, New York. I just want to cut a quick question because I think you briefly mentioned something about the Department of Health's Heat Vulnerability Index, and I was wondering how this information will be sort of disseminated to other state agencies for use in some of their own work related to execution of the heat action plan. That's one question. And then I think a more specific question that I had is if this group was aware of the ongoing work around extreme heat consumer protections that's in a public service commission docket right now. And so I'm just trying to connect the dots between the development of this tool, dissemination of this information to other state agencies pursuant to the heat action plan, and then like direct relevance of both the DOH data and the like to an ongoing related public service commission proceeding. So just could you help me sort of figure out how this will be kind of disseminated to other state agencies for integration into their policy and procedure development? That'd be great.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're sharing this tool in different meetings with the agencies and agency partners, the Extreme Heat Action Plan Working Group being one of them. And we also have that advisory panel that I mentioned that includes members. I can't really, I don't have the expertise for the PSC proceedings other than we share this information, but this is also currently an informational purposes tool. I see a Albany office boardroom has the hand up too.
Yeah, hey Leo, this is Neil.
Oh, hi Neil.
Thank you and Dr. Andreni for the presentation. And just in response to Eric's question, I'll just, as an example, in the Extreme Heat Action Plan, one of the recommendations was, to update the Heat Vulnerability Index. So we've worked closely with Leo throughout that process, and we have downloaded the Urban Heat Island data. And what we're trying to do is think about how we want to integrate that with the existing HVI, which is really based mainly on census tract data from the US Census and the American Community Survey. So we're really excited about this because this would give us some exposure information to a company that sort of community level information, which the original version of the HVI is based upon. So that's what we're working towards right now, as one example of how a state agency is using it.
Sure. I guess I'm just very kind of interested in getting into other, like, dissemination into other related agencies who have kind of critical related efforts going on, like, again, like extreme heat consumer protections proceeding that's happening right now. I'm not suggesting that this information could be like directly maybe used in its current prototype state right now, because it's not even up on our website right now. But I think it's important to ensure that, in terms of execution of the plan and, this ongoing proceeding, that there's some intentional effort to communicate this information, because it does pick up on the vulnerability index, and it does make recommendations for how utilities are supposed to handle things such as like service terminations, et cetera, under extreme weather. And this could be a really useful tool once it's ready for showtime or public consumption to be to inform those statewide regulatory mandates around extreme heat consumer protections. So just flagging it if nothing else.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. And our partner agencies on the heat plan are one updated, and like we shared the tool with them through the Extreme Heat Action Plan work group already too, and then also through the staff steering committee that has members from related agencies also. But point well taken to keep distributing it across agencies also, in addition to the public too.
I guess I would add, Leo, and it's a set of maps that have a polygon and raster component that could be integrated into other GIS databases or vice versa. And so Leo and his colleague Joanna have been giving us access to any DEC polygons, including the disadvantaged community polygons, to make sure that we are looking at that intersectionality.
Awesome, thank you. And maybe just as this is a good apropos in terms of the next steps, so we mentioned urban heat island maps, and we gave a little bit of a preview of the online toolkit and how we think about simulating certain kind of solutions, which goes back to the question, for example, related to ag and markets and solutions in the food producing world, and seeing the effects of projects. Next slide, please. In an effort to developing that, we are expanding, and you've seen the drivers of Ted explains the drivers of the model. We're expanding how, as a next step, how users can engage with those maps. I don't need to dwell on the details of how this model is driven, other than next page, please. That the levers that Ted mentioned that drive that model can be adjusted to represent different interventions into the built environment, right? Like, so you have a parking lot in a community, and you increase the level of tree canopy, that will have an anticipated effect on the heat in that area. And so we are, as a next step, working with the advisory panels on identifying different kinds of important solutions that communities are thinking about, that we know are effective in addressing the urban heat island effect, to basically preset those levers as scenarios or cases of interventions to display the effect in any given area of the map. So, for example, you are looking at I live in Round Lake, New York. You're looking at Round Lake, New York, and you have a hot area, and you want to plant a micro park, for example, in a specific parking lot. Then the preset levers are set so that they represent that solution, so you can explore the potential for solutions for addressing the urban heat island effect. That will never be as effective as like site-specific modeling and engineering and design, but it should give some indication for communities for interventions that can help start address those impacts, and with that explore solutions. So that is one of our next steps, in addition to what Ted, Professor, and Trenny already described in the hourly runs and the future climate change data, to have this more sophisticated and comprehensive data set, not only for current conditions, but then future conditions too. So that is just to fill in some of the blanks that we had in addition to what we discussed in the previous question. So I will stop here. This is the information I had with me as an update, and so we can like go back to questions, or I hand it back to you, Oliver. And thank you so much otherwise for your attention today.
Did anybody have any questions? Michael?
Yes, I'll go. I'm just trying to connect maybe some of this to the criteria that we use, and I think we're using, from correct, number of days above 90 degrees in our current data set. How would you compare this, what this is representing, to that? Is there a different way to think about the hottest hour relative to this, and in terms of that, we're talking about the health impacts from this. So if you could help with the lens or the framing of how to think about this, maybe as relative to that would be helpful. Thank you.
And Ted, I would turn to you in response, but just to clarify the question, this means how, for example, the hottest, you're asking how, for example, the hottest hour maps could help understand extreme heat differently in the context of the disadvantaged community criteria, as opposed to say the number of days above 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. Ted, do you have an insight here? And it's okay if not. I'm just also not the public health expert to connect that thought more explicitly.
What I can add is also the appreciation for the concern about what are the metrics of extreme heat. We're currently using those of New York State and the National Weather Service to define that extreme heat threshold. And the metrics include whether it's a air temperature, a heat index, or a wet bulb globe temperature. And so when we go through the 10 years of historical and future data, we'll identify each event and the duration of the events that meet those thresholds. And then we will run a set of scenarios using the levers that Leo was showing to identify how we can reduce the number of extreme heat events and the intensity and duration of those events.
And
I'm sorry oh, go on.
No, I think this is helpful. And I think the other thing I would add is that the model data here provides with a different sense of how this heat unfolds within the environments we move through. And on a different resolution, right? Like you have weather stations usually located outside of urban heat islands. So that data might be not reflective of the experience in an area that is really has these concentrations of high heat. And so what this data may be able to contribute is to go into greater geographic specificity, taking into account this complexity of the interaction of not only air temperature or the weather station data, but also how this interacts with the built environment to produce those experiences expressed either as heat index or as wet bulb globe temperature in future iterations also. So it gives you a different data set, so to say, to approach those experiences. I think there's others with better expertise to correlate that to the experience as it relates to, say, the public health, the heat health outcomes and thinking through that. So there's probably additional ways to think or like work needed to think through what that might mean for the purposes of the disadvantaged community criteria. I hope this is helpful.
Yes, thank you.
Eric, do you have another question?
Yeah, maybe I missed this a little earlier in our review of the mapping information here, but the maps that you showed were from 2019 data, and the weather station data is like basically daily temperature reads. So you're dealing with like a pretty big difference in temporality. I'm just wondering how you like maybe again to some of the comparative nature of the two different data sets, like how do you think of them as being like useful when I think some of what maybe Arif was alluding to was more like real-time impacts of compounding or intersectional effects happening in communities on real time. So just it's a little bit of a messy question here, but I'm just trying to think about multiple data sets across different time scales. Like one is historic, one's real time, one's granular, one's not. Like it just feels very like it's a complicated sense making effort. So I'm trying to think through like application, maybe is the word I'm looking for, like when trying to either figure out so I'm trying to make sense of all this. So maybe that my pea-sized brain is not catching all the like utility here between a static visualization and some of the real-time data assessment and analysis that someone might do to try and figure out how this is impacting someone in their community.
Right. And I think Professor Entreni might have had to jump for his teaching obligation, so we can follow up if I don't capture that information correctly. But like it's a little bit complicated to wrap your head around. I'm like working on it sometimes myself, still not being the weather expert that Professor Antrani is. But it might also help further foreground what the previous question was. So the data here is weather station data ranging from 2010 to 2019, and taking that weather data and looking at how it interacts with those different land cover information, tree cover, water balance, just like this model, right? So what you end up with is an indication for intensity within that space. So it, like, in other words, to get back to that urban heat island aspect, it shows you how the interaction of temperature and the built environment exacerbate the experience of heat in space. And so that's really helpful, amongst others, to understand where, say, the built environment can be modified to reduce the urban heat island effect, and where there is opportunity for additional green infrastructure solutions, for example, because there's a concentration of this like heat driving composition of the built environment. It's not a real-time, here's the heat right now kind of utility, or in the last 2 years. Components of the final tool will allow that better as they have those hourly runs, but they're still not like for the last 5 years. Part of that is because, yes, the built environment change, heat intensifies, for which we will have the climate change data for the future years, but the relationship and where those concentrations are, they are more persistent, right, like over time. And so the key purpose of this tool is really to understand where the built conditions of our environment exacerbate the heat or reduce the heat, and how can we think strategically about interventions into our environment to reduce urban heat island effect and those components where heat is, for the lack of a better word, produced. Does that make sense, or help situate that data better?
I guess I was just thinking about, so for example, going back to the extreme heat consumer protections, they're taking daily reads of temperatures in certain locations, for example, in Con Ed territory across New York City. And so there, I see this, the historic data perhaps coming into maybe tension, for lack of a better term, with the real-time reporting that's being done by utilities, for example, in the various locations within their service territory. And so I guess there's value in looking at sort of historic instance or trend lines, but then if that, let's say there's a spike in 2 of the 4 reading, temperature stations that they use to support their shut-off notices or whatever, and it's outside of this, the census tracts that are highly rated in the mapping work that you've done.
Right.
It seems like there's a tension there, and I'm just trying to wrap my head around that tension, because it's really like both temporal and scalar. You know what I'm saying?
I absolutely understand what you mean. Yeah, and I think that's a really important point that's really important to emphasize, and so to underscore. And so I really appreciate this question. I tried to allure to this a little bit, right? This is a model. This will never be perfect, and locally specific data and local experiences will probably better pick up of where there is concentrations that this model, based on the data that it's using, can't capture it, or where there might be a spike that's just a local dynamic that this model can't capture. The purpose of this data, or where this data has a great utility in that regard, is to help identify areas where there is a potential for concentrations of heat, where additional study might be particularly impactful in terms of both understanding the local experiences and the real local data of heat, but also in terms of where solutions might be particularly effective. It can't supplant local measurements or local experiences. There's many communities that don't have that, and I think that there it's particularly valuable. But then other places, for example, New York City, has really robust local data already that probably is more robust than this model. So that is something that we try to really strongly communicate. I could probably have done a little bit a better job of underscoring that here. We have it also explicit on the website and the tool, and we'll continue to communicate it. This helps understand where those concentrations are, some of the dynamics behind it, explore solutions. But it can't supplant, as I said, or like substitute for going into the communities, working with the communities and generating local data. But many communities don't have that capacity or don't even have any basic data to start with. And that's where the maximum power, so to say, of the tool really comes to shine, right? Like in those places with that lack of capacity information. And it's also utility of, for the lack of a better word, a digital twin, right? Like you can then play with those levers of the model to see what the potential changes are. So that's the other piece. But again, where possible, supported with additional local data.
That's helpful. Thanks. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I have another question if there's time. Yeah, so we're working with historic data. We've talked a little bit about real-time data. I think what would be very helpful is forecasting heat data as well. I mean, given the existing features that you mentioned, infrastructure and otherwise, because I mean, even if a community right now isn't experiencing the urban heat island effect, if we forecast out 5, 10, 15 years, then we might be able to introduce some interventions now to mitigate that. Also, I think it would better prepare communities that are already experiencing the urban heat island effect to introduce measures right now before things get worse. So I'm curious, you already have a lot to do with what's already on your plate with historic data, but has there been any thought given into doing some forecasting?
Not forecasting in the sense of, say, run the next weather report through this model, especially when this model has the intensity duration component. So not only the hottest hour, but really being able to do hourly runs. That might be of interest for someone to explore outside of this project. It's not in the scope of this project, but the data and the model itself live on the i3 platform, if anybody has heard of that. So it's also available for others to take and play, so to say. So others can take this model, go into i3, which is open source, and iterate on it. So that's one potential. The other aspect of forecasting that you point to is within the scope of this project and the other next step, in addition to that simulations component that I mentioned, and that is to bring that future climate data in, right? To really look also at projected future conditions and rerun, so to say, the model, so that we can get a gauge on how climate change may exacerbate existing spots or where might new ones emerge. That will always be limited in this scope of work. Land use parameters change too over time, and that's not in the scope of this work project. But we are in an effort of setting this project and the outcomes of the research component, so to say, of this project up so that others can continue this work either with the research group at ESF or independently as this lives in i3 again. And that's the other thing that we're really excited about here, is that this is all open source and ready for people to iterate on. But there is this component of future climate change to be brought in as the next iteration here too. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Leo. I think that is going to wrap up Leo's presentation. Thank you to Leo and Dr. Enrudi. Excuse me. We are now going to go to Ilana for final comments.
Great.
Closing remarks.
Thank you so much. So before we bring things to a close today, I just wanted to bring up real quickly for working group members, as some of you may know, the disadvantaged communities criteria was subject to litigation that was brought against DEC and the Climate Justice Working Group. There has been a decision in the case that upheld the disadvantaged communities criteria and the process that the Climate Justice Working Group used to establish it. So the decision, as well as some of the other case-related documents, were made publicly available. They were going to be made publicly available on the Climate Justice Working Group's website. And just note that there has been a notice of appeal that was filed with the parties that brought the lawsuit. If folks want to go and look up that information, but we will be making that available for the public, and it is already available on our SharePoint for working group members to review. Additionally, we have 2 more Climate Justice Working Group meetings scheduled for this year, October 14th and November 4th, both on Tuesday, both at 2 p.m. So during these meetings, we hope to deliberate on the disadvantaged communities criteria. Obviously, as we get closer to those dates, we'll make agendas available to everyone, and we will have media advisories that will go out that will identify what we'll be working on. And always, as a reminder for working group members, in order for us to deliberate on the disadvantaged communities criteria, we need to make sure that we have quorum in compliance with open meetings law. So that means we need to have at least 7 members in physical, publicly accessible locations that basically anybody can enter. So, typically we use a lot of our state offices, but for working group members, if there are locations, if we send you locations and they're not, as agreeable to you, feel free to send us some ideas and we can absolutely look into those. We want to make sure that we are, making this as available to you as possible. So reach out to myself or to Oliver if you have some ideas of locations that could fit the bill and be compliant under open meetings law. Other than that, are there any other questions, comments, or concerns before we close things out today? I'm going to take that as a no. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you for taking so much time out of your busy schedules. We'll see you again in a couple of weeks. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns in that intervening time period, please feel free to reach out to me. Right. Thanks so much, everyone. See you again soon.